Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Media Talks TV. This is your host, Tony J. If you're new here, click the like, share, and subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. This week has been, you know, I guess I could say this week has been my birthday, but my birthday fell on the week of the King of Pop's birthday, Michael Jackson. And what's so interesting, I wanted to start off this conversation about the about Michael Jackson. You know, it's been almost 15 years to be exact. And I guess you can say if Michael Jackson were still here, he would be 66 years old. And sometimes I wonder, even after his death, what would have became of Michael Jackson if he made it to his 60s. And in many ways, what would have happened if Prince made it to his 60s? You know, not a lot of us talk about Michael Jackson's significance and impact on music. I mean, we talk about it in the guise of the fandom, but we're fans of his and always will be. But we don't we don't really talk about him in the sense of what he truly gave us near the end of his life. You had in the 20th century, you had so many entertainers. And when you think about, in particular, black entertainers, the three in my mind that stand out the most was always people like Louis Armstrong, who came from the streets of New Orleans and became one of the greatest trumpet players of the jazz age. You couldn't really think about jazz without really thinking about Louis Armstrong. And then there is, of course, James Brown. When you think about James Brown, as far as entertainers, he gave us the dance moves, the choreography, and this kind of like character in a sense, the Godfather of soul. That the pompadour and seeing James Brown go from the pompadour to having his natural afro after 1968. And then for that, and for a side note, maybe you could also say Sammy Davis Jr., one of the greatest entertainers. Sammy kept tap dancing alive throughout the 60s and throughout the 50s and 60s. And then when he went to perform under Frank Sinatra, he was loved by many, especially white people. But when you think about these entertainers, when you think about Louis Armstrong, Sammy Davis Jr., James Brown, and Michael Jackson, they all have a recurring theme about fame and entertainment in a sense that they all had tragic ends. And Michael was really a part of that tragic end. He had a great rise and a tragic fall. Louis Armstrong died being kind of being forgotten in jazz music because when we got to the 60s and early 70s, jazz became more conscious, became more militant, and jazz musicians were focusing on how to bring Afrocentricity back into the jazz movement, fusion, and trying to grapple with that. So he was a victim of, you would say maybe Louis Armstrong was a victim of change. And then there's Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy started entertaining people at the age of 5, right along with the Nicholas brothers. And even now with his tragic car accident that left him blind in one eye or without an eye, he came out of that and became one of the greatest entertainers of all time to be embraced by white people. But then the politics of that time when he married a white woman, he became discarded by white society because he married a white woman. And then he became labeled an Uncle Tom and discarded by black society because he kissed Nixon on the cheek. He became a victim of politics, of vicious politics around race and militant politics that were starting to come up in the 70s. He became a victim of the circumstances of those times to where nobody embraced him until he died, until he became broke and passed away. And then there's James Brown. James Brown is a victim of not the politics or the victim of, he's not a victim of politics, but right along with Louis Armstrong, he was a victim of change in a sense that when you start something and you create something, it once it gets away from you and it becomes something different. When you start something, you become the founder of something. You become this type of person where you kind of are not able to regain the fame that you once had. So you have to be able to change with what the music is changing with. So when James Brown had his band, and then by the time the mid 70s and late 70s came around, everybody had a funk band. And that was kind of like, everybody ignored James Brown and then came back into the limelight when he went to jail. And then that became the whole precedent of his whole entire life, you know. Same thing with Rick James, where he had this rise and then this fall and then forgotten and then coming back after his death becoming more valuable. So Rick James died. It Everybody started saying I'm Rick James bitch. When it reinvigorated his popularity to another generation, and another generation started listening to his music after he died. And what's so funny about that is sometimes people are valuable to us when they're dead than alive. And it always seemed like that with Michael Jackson. You know, when we think about people like, current musicians that we've listened to over the years, and, a side note, you know, I always said that 1990 was the year that funk died. And there's a reason why I say 1990 was the year funk died, was when Rick James ended up going to prison and when James Brown ended up going to prison. Because these were two people that really held the power. And then I think it was Morris Day. Morris Day disbanded, released Pandemonium, and then they disbanded The Time. And then, of course, with that disbanding, there weren't a lot of funk bands in the 90s. If you want to call a Digital Underground a funk band, that was the last of it. And then it was like rap had kind of just taken over by that time. And people wanted to listen to that instead of listening to real musicians anymore. And then when Can't Touch This came out, that's when kind of funk kind of got eviscerated by rap music. So it's funny how popularity changes. I never really wanted to be a musician because of that, because I seen all these entertainers when I was young be at the top and then fall. And Michael Jackson is one of those people. Like, again, he had a tragic end, but throughout that end, he was still considered a global icon. And this week I kind of sat back and I listened to some of his albums. Um, I didn't grow up to listen to Thriller or Bad. I wasn't around when those two albums came out, but most would say, from what I've heard from experience, that those two albums really put Michael Jackson at the top. And with it brought all this new fandom around the world. He became a global icon. He became really the first black global icon. You know, for him to come out of the steel town of Gary, Indiana, to then have a mother and a father, one being a nurse, another being working at a steel mill and being a professional musician to have himself, and then to come from that bottom of the gutter, because even now Gary is one of the most dangerous places to grow up in there. But for him to come out of there and then become a global superstar says something about how special Michael Jackson was, you know. And we don't really think about that. But then I started thinking about it when I listened to the Dangerous album. And Dangerous, it had a lot of overtones in it, a lot of one of his I think Dangerous album was his most slept on album. Everybody says that was the most unpopular album of Michael Jackson because that was at that point that his sound had changed and he stopped working with Quincy Jones and started working with Teddy Riley. But when Michael came out with Dangerous, it had a lot of impactful songs, and I didn't really think about it. You know, his rumorings of race, environmentalism, uh, this thing with his obsession with P.T. Barnum, which was a big thing. Like he had, if you look at the album, he has a picture of Tom Thumb and P.T. Barnum, which I started noticing. I didn't notice. I thought it was odd. And then he has the globe. And then if you look in the picture, the album art was just kind of out of this the norm of what he usually does, but it was on another level that made you really think. And Michael Jackson's Dangerous kind of made me think about like all this stuff he was talking about. And I don't think there are any other artists that really touched on stuff like the age crisis, environmentalism. Um, you know, it was something that I had when I first heard it. That was my first time really knowing who Michael Jackson was, and then when I got a little bit older, then I started listening to Thriller, and then I started listening to Bad, and I started to notice why people love Michael Jackson so much. And so many, I guess, when I first listened to it, I, you know, I thought the album was amazing, but that was my first time really listening to him. But then when you get to history, which you'll notice if you get to history, there's this undertone of anger in that whole entire album because that album was when he came off of his first allegation, and then Blood on the Dance Floor was kind of like, that's that Blood on the Dance Floor was kind of a throwaway. Those are just a compilation of remixes from off the History album. But then, we get to Invincible. And Invincible seems like that's just a play on his fame. That was the first time we actually saw Michael Jackson become very, very commercialized, and it wasn't a lot of it was one of his albums that didn't have a lot of conscious overtones in the album. You know, he did a lot of pop ballads. He had one song on 9/11, and I guess the other parts of the album I didn't really embrace as much because it felt too commercial. And being that he was on Sony and was working with Tommy Mottola at the time, the album to me was kind of like it seemed like it was his very last album because then you didn't see really much of the energy in it. And that's where I wanted to really get to this point about art, success, and how we sacrifice ourselves for our art in hopes that people will love us. The people say that artists are these broke, starving, successful people, but when I think about Michael Jackson, And then I think about a lot of artists that don't get noticed until they die, or they don't get appreciated until they're dead and in the ground. Some of these artists that we come to love have sacrificed who they were in order to give us everything. And it's like we don't realize nor appreciate the artists, especially in this country. We don't appreciate art. And I feel like that's a value system that the United States itself has to change, because when we think about art and we think about artists and who they are, we don't look at it as being real work, or we don't look at artists as being human beings. But we love their art, but when it comes to who they are, the artist itself, we're not able to separate the person from the art. And that's always been a problem. No one's identity should be linked to their work. Even when I produce this broadcast, as you hear me speaking, I don't look at YouTube nor my content as an extension of who I am. I look at it as just something that I put out into the world, and if they like it, they like it, and if they don't, they don't. And that's the thing about art, and it's also a thing about work. You can't connect your personal worth to your work, and you can't allow your work to be an extension of who you are on the outside of that art. Artists are not appreciated for who they are, and I feel like in certain ways, America, and even me in particular, never really showed a true appreciation for Michael Jackson, even though we say we love his music, but we never got to really truly appreciate the gift that was bestowed upon the world when Michael was still alive. And sometimes I think back, why why now? Why do we appreciate Michael Jackson after he's dead when we didn't appreciate him when he was alive? When we think about the trauma that we put this man through, I see a lot of black folks who sat and made fun of Michael Jackson because of his skin color. And I remember growing up hearing comedians talk about Michael, make fun of Michael, whole comedy routine about Michael Jackson. I remember watching Def Comedy Jam. And if you look at Def Comedy Jam, maybe the first two seasons, every two seasons, every season got at least maybe one or two Michael Jackson jokes, either about his hair catching on fire, or the fact that he is lighter complected, or he had an illness like vitiligo. And I'm sitting up here saying, I'm like, all the years we made jokes about Michael Jackson, made jokes about his skin color, made jokes about his children, told people that he was sleeping in a hyperbaric chamber, buying the elephant man's bones. All this crazy shit that came with Michael Jackson's fame, and also like other people, we ravel in the weirdness that was Michael Jackson, who he was. Maybe Michael Jackson had this kind of obsession with fame because of his love for P.T. Barnum and Tom Thumb. And I notice how most of his music is like an exhibition show. If you look at some of the stuff that he's done in the past, it's all exhibitionism. He made his music a part of the magic that was Michael Jackson. So it wasn't just the music itself, but it was the art. It it was Captain EO. It was Smooth Criminal. It was History. The short films. He had this whole compilation of short films. They weren't just music videos, they were movies. And he always referred to them as short films. He didn't refer to them as simply music videos because he wanted the audience to get an experience. And then there was the concerts. And this man could bring in so much money. He was literally a walking cash cow. And he was able to create that through his perfectionism, through his visions and how he saw the world. But also, I believe that Michael is really a reflection of all of us and how we have an obsession with the odd and the weird and the outlandish. And I think that's how he was able to draw people in. That's why he had this obsession with P.T. Barnum, because P.T. Barnum was able to draw crowds and he liked that idea. There's not going to be another entertainer in the world that is similar to Michael Jackson. There never will be. And I think we should often think about that for a second. Do you know any artist that does pyrotechnics on stage? Not to mention, Michael Jackson was also the first artist to do an NFL halftime show when it wasn't even popular. He was the first person to do it in 1993. When the second allegation came, it seemed like all of us turned our backs on him. And even I myself, when the allegations came out to be not guilty, I guess in hindsight, I stopped listening to his music at one point because I didn't think he would have done something like that. But I also believe that he was also very odd as a person. And I think in some ways, I guess I saw that I just wasn't into his music after maybe 15 years old. I didn't care to listen to Michael Jackson after that, after the whole court cases. Sitting back watching court TV, seeing him come in with a full entourage of people behind him, knowing that he wasn't guilty. But once we turned our backs on him, then when he died, it was like, oh, Michael Jackson died. Michael Jackson dead. Oh, he collapsed. They say he died in a coma. Da, da, da. And then all of a sudden, when he died, it was like, oh, we love you, Michael Jackson. But did we really even love him when he was alive? I mean, we called the man Wacko Jacko. I don't even think we could ever forgive ourselves for that. We called the man Wacko Jacko. I don't think And we subjected his kids to that trauma, that media frenzy, the paparazzi following him, and harassing him, harassing his family, standing out near his home, harassing his children. I mean, how do we really consciously sleep at night knowing that we actually contributed to running this man to his early grave? We all, as Americans, killed Michael Jackson. We made jokes. We call his family weird. You look on a living color. You look on a living color. There's a lot of ugly jokes on there about Michael Jackson, and especially the one that Tommy Davidson did with Jonathan Taylor Thomas, where he's playing Home Alone and he burns his hair off like that. That's one of the famous ones. It was like there were two or three Michael Jackson jokes that were kind of just really aberrant, abhorrent. And I know people are going to say, well, that was 32 years ago. That was 34, 35 years ago. Attitudes have changed. But when he was alive, what did we do as black people? We dogged him out. We destroyed his character. Then we made fun of his skin color or the fact that he didn't date black women, that he was always with white women, that he was always surrounded by white kids, but he would never come back to the hood to take care of poor inner city black kids. We made jokes like that. We made questions. We questioned his blackness. We questioned whether he was going to give money back to the black community. But then, even when you go back to when he was a teenager, we made fun of his skin color. We made fun of his nose. And he had to live with that. He had to live with the trauma that black folks gave him. You can't say you love somebody and appreciate somebody and you make fun of them or you mock them or you shame them. And I think in a lot of ways, we as black folks in particular, and white folks as well, have made it in a certain way where he was a tortured soul. And he never really fully recovered from that trauma. And then we pushed him after the second allegation, we kind of pushed him into being a recluse. And then he went bankrupt and then he just simply died because of the people that he had around him. And sometimes I think about that and I'm like, you know, and even when he died, he never got the appreciation from President Obama. I mean, think about that for a minute. Like when I look back at every artist, I mean, you don't have to agree whether or not he committed a crime or not, but the president of the United States had a responsibility to make an announcement or give condolences to the Jackson family, and he never did that. It was like he acknowledged it, but then said something. President Obama said something along the lines that he had a complicated life. Basically, I'm not making any announcements or celebrating a accused child molester. And it was Obama trying to play play it safe by not touching or broaching the issue. And that was President Obama's way. He did that his first year, his first term in office, first year in office. We didn't give him the acknowledgement that he truly deserved. And that's one of the primary reasons why, you know, if you really truly appreciate somebody, make sure you show your appreciation and respect while they're still alive. I can't say this enough. Why now? You know, even after Michael Jackson's death, it seemed like music had changed dramatically. Nobody was writing R&B music anymore after 2007. I can't name a love ballad to really come out of the 2000s, the late 2000s into the early 2010s. You know, with Michael Jackson's music still being, he has unreleased music. It just doesn't seem right now to really release it when we didn't show appreciation for the current music that he gave us. It seems like the world is very different now with Michael Jackson not being around because the music has gotten more profane, more overtly sexual, and just all around degenerate. At least in Michael Jackson's case, he had the decency to be mindful of what he put out into the world. And he also was very mindful that music has longevity beyond life itself. Later down the line, we're going to find out what he left us. And it seems like the art that he left us is kind of like he left us a treasure trove of music for us to appreciate, most likely beyond millennia. And hopefully, I'll be around to actually be able to enjoy the rest of it. That's that hasn't been discovered. This has been another segment of retrospectives on Media Talks TV. This is your host, Tony J. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Share this video. Got couple more videos coming down the line. I guess after these last two videos, we'll be taking Media Talks TV will be taking a bit of a sabbatical for a little bit to reshape the quality of the content on this channel. So we might not be posting for maybe a couple of months, but be sure to stay tuned, stay subscribed. Make sure you're getting those email notifications because I want everybody to make sure they stay tuned. We're trying to improve the quality of this channel. Make sure you know we get better at these videos as time goes along. I'm your host, Tony J, and I'm out. Thank you.